Hey there, John Morris here, johnmorrisonline.com. Welcome back to another episode of the John Morris Show. This one, I want to talk about this word hustle. Now, we all know that this sort of idea predominantly, it came about because of Gary Vaynerchuk. And he's sort of a big proponent of this thing. And I want to state right up front that I love Gary Vee. I've personally learned a ton from Gary Vee. This isn't something that's meant as an attack on him or anything like that. I stumbled on his stuff several years ago, and for me it came at a really good time when I was sort of trying to figure out sort of my place in this whole internet thing and social media, and I learned a ton from him about that and content marketing and really just sort of life and work ethic in general and all that. So again, I have a lot of respect for the guy. I've learned a ton from the guy, and I think his message about hustle and about work ethic for some people in the right scenario is desperately needed. If we're honest and we look at sort of the tech industry and in particular kind of the startup sort of culture, there's a lot of people that are young kids, in their early 20s, who sort of have this, if you build it, then they will come type of mentality, and desperately needed to hear this message about hustle and the amount of work that it's going to take and so forth. And I think that's primarily who he sees his audience as. So again, for those people in that situation, it's a message that's absolutely needed. However, like with anything, I think these things sort of get perverted. So you have people, and I think Gary at times would probably even admit himself that he's guilty of this, but you have people who take this concept and then just run it to this, I would call it, illogical extreme, and it just sort of gets out of hand. And then you also have people who sort of do the fake it till you make it thing, and they'll post their Instagram photos, about to go hustle at the gym, or I'm about to go hustle in this meeting, and sort of are making it a show about how much hustling they're doing, when in reality they're not accomplishing anything. And I think that's sort of what the problem has become here, is people hustling for show, or people just hustling for hustling's sake. Like, it's become such this mantra and this attitude that people are doing it without really thinking about it. And so they can post their pictures on Instagram or Twitter or whatever. And I think falling into this trap of, well, if I'm busy, then I must be accomplishing something. And that's not always necessarily the case. So like I said, I want to get into that in this episode and talk about some of the things that I think you can do to maximize what you get out of your hustle, and to not make this, to sort of kill this word in the sense of it being overused or misused the way that I think it is. Of course, before I do that, I do want to remind you that today is the last day for Udemy's current $10.99 deal. So if you're wanting to get some Udemy training or get some coding training, or really any sort of training that you might need to help you with your career, help you learn how to code, all that. Again, Udemy is a great place to do that. Some of the best web development, web design courses on the planet. And right now you can get most of their participating courses for just $10.99. You'll need to use the link johnmorrisonline.com/March. There'll be a little button right up here, hopefully, that you can click. That'll make it a little bit easier. But again, it's johnmorrisonline.com/March. That'll trigger the deal for you, and then you can sort of browse the site for the different courses and so forth. So that ends today at 11:59 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So if you want to get in on that, you need to be sure and do it now. Again, link johnmorrisonline.com/March. So with that out of the way, one of the first points that I want to make when it comes to this is the difference between efficiency and effectiveness. Because again, a lot of people, I think, sometimes get caught up in this idea of hustling just for hustling's sake, that if I'm doing something, if I'm busy, then I'm accomplishing something. And like I said, that's not always the case. If you're running 100 miles an hour, but you're getting nowhere, you're not actually accomplishing anything. And sometimes the thing to do is to slow down, to think through your next step, and to, take a maybe slower but more impactful step. Sometimes that's the way you can be more effective than simply just running 100 miles an hour and actually doing nothing. And so that shouldn't be an excuse to not do anything, but there's sort of this balance between moving just to move and not moving at all. There's a sort of balance in there. And I think ultimately it comes down to what you want out of life. This is why I don't think what's happening with all this is necessarily Gary's fault, because he is very good about making sure that he prefaces, whenever he talks about hustle, he always prefaces it by talking about, he'll use the line, "I want to buy the New York Jets." And that's sort of line to represent how big his goals are. And, if that's the kind of thing that you're after, then great. You are going to there's a lot of hustle involved with that. And, some of the lifestyle choices he's made yours may have to be similar in order for you to get there. But I think a lot of people have convinced themselves that that's what they want when it's not. And I was guilty of this when I first sort of kind of got into his stuff. And I convinced myself, because at the time it was sort of this perfect storm of coming across his stuff and all these ideas about hustle, while at the same time I'd sort of started to figure some stuff out about freelancing and how to get work. And so I convinced myself that I wanted to run this sort of big freelance agency and be this kind of mega businessman with all these employees. And so I dove headfirst into that. And it didn't take long for me to realize that my heart wasn't in it. And I've talked about this before. I had 1 year where I really dove into freelancing, and then by the end of the year, I was completely burnt out. I've done episodes on this before. And, there was a good part of that where I knew, it didn't take long for me to know that this wasn't what I wanted. But I just sort of kept, I was in it, and I just kept going. And it took me to the point, to my breaking point. And so again, I think a lot of people can fall for this trap of convincing themselves that this is what they want when it's really not. And so the big question, sort of the big answer that you need to discover is why, right? For Gary, again, it's about buying the New York Jets. It's about that sort of legacy. For me, that's not what I want at all. And I've gotten a lot more clear on that over the last few years. And the way I would describe this is, some people, when I say my goals aren't that big, they might look at that and be like, well, you don't have ambition, or you don't have this, or you don't have that. And I could retort to that by saying, when I hear Gary Vee talk about the way, the situation he has with his kids, the way it is now, from what the last I've seen, he basically is pretty much gone during the week. He's working, he's up till 2, 3 in the morning, gets up at 6 a.m., whatever it is, whatever the hours are. Basically doesn't see his wife and kids during the week, but then on the weekends he completely checks out of his work and he's with his family and he's 100% in. And so he's sort of this all in both ways. Now, when I hear that sort of thing, if I wanted to be derogatory, I could say there's no way in the world that I would do that. I could never imagine myself doing that and spending that much time away from my kids. And the reality of it is it's not a derogatory thing either way. It's not that I don't have ambition. It's that we're all different. We all have different things that we value. And for me, my kids they're the most important, they're the most important thing in my life. And what I ultimately want out of life is to be able to play with my kids, to be there to teach them, to be there for them. That's what matters to me. That's what my legacy is for me, is through my kids. Now, again, his legacy might be through, what he builds with his companies and so forth. Neither of those is wrong. What's important is that you figure out what yours is, what it is that you're after. Because if you get so focused on hustling and working and work ethic and building and so forth, that you're undermining the very reason why you're hustling in the first place, what's the point? And that's one of the big lessons that I learned that year is by the time I got to the end of the year, I was burnt out. My kids were sort of like, what is going on with dad? Because, I was working all these hours, the relationships with them and my wife and all those things were deteriorating because I was unhappy because I was chasing something I thought I wanted, but I didn't. And I was so focused on hustling that I didn't take the time to stop and look around and really figure out what it is that I wanted. So to me, it's ultimately about first principles. It's like Stephen Covey said, you have to begin with the end in mind. So what is your purpose? What is your reason for pursuing any of this in the first place? What is the legacy that you want to leave? You need to answer those questions. Sit down, think about that, answer those questions. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but you have to have some idea. And the big thing is you don't want to transplant someone else's vision of their life and their future for your own, right? You don't want to look at Gary Vee and see him saying he wants to buy the Jets and, I want to buy the Bulls or whatever. And that's not really what you want. You have to take the time to sit down and think about this stuff. And when you nail that down, the picture gets a lot clearer and you get a lot better idea of what to do. And then you can tap into that hustling sort of mentality to hustle towards those goals because you have a clearer picture of what really matters and you know what that balance is going to be between hustling and taking time for yourself, for your family, your kids, or whatever. And, you're not going to hustle just to hustle or hustle just so you can brag about it on Twitter. You have a purpose and your hustling will be a lot more effective. So, and then you're not going to have, your family or your spouse or your kids sitting around or whoever it is that you care about that is the reason why you're doing this. They're not going to be sitting around wondering what happened to dad or mom or their husband or their wife or whatever because you're just so caught up in trying to hustle just to hustle. So again, think about those first principles and the reason why you're doing it in the first place and use your ability to hustle as a tool, not as this sort of way of life mantra that no other way to live. It will burn you out, especially if you're hustling after something that your heart really isn't in. Now, another sort of point about this is, to keep in mind is if you're hustling is only one part of the equation, right? If you're hustling, but you're doing the wrong things, then you're going to get nowhere. And so it's sort of obvious that while your ability to hustle is one part of this, knowledge and knowing what to do and how to do it is critical to maximizing that effort and amplifying that effort. And so the question becomes, what knowledge, where do I get that knowledge, and so forth. And one of the good ways that you can get that is by becoming a supporting listener of the show over on Patreon. And the reason why is because you're not just getting access to a video here or a tutorial there. You're getting quite literally access to everything that I have. All of my courses, all of my source code, tutorial videos, stuff that's not even out there or available anywhere else. It's all inside of there. And so it's sort of this I want to say gold mine, be too cliche, but it's sort of this trove of information that's available to help you figure that out. And when you just know what you want to do and are able to decide what you want to do, to teach you the how to actually get it done so that you're able to maximize your effort and get the most out of your hustle. So again, I think it's a really good way to get access to the knowledge that will allow you to be not just efficient, but effective in what you're doing. And it's, again, quite literally everything that I have to offer you and will have in the future because all future courses and so forth I post there as well. So if you want to learn more about that, you can head on over to johnmorrisonline.com/Patreon. All the details for that are there, the links to enroll and so forth. And of course, you'll also be helping support the show, so I would really, really appreciate it. Allow me to continue to do this on a daily basis, but also get the training, the knowledge, the information you need to be more effective in your career as well. So again, the link is johnmorrisonline.com/Patreon. All right, that'll do it for this episode. If you like this episode, I'd appreciate if you'd hit the like button. Also, subscribe if you haven't so you can get notified of future episodes. You also need to make sure and hit that bell thing so you actually get notified when an episode is released. Also, past episodes and links to subscribe on Android, iTunes, TuneIn, all that you can find at johnmorrisshow.com. And if you'll rate and review the podcast over on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate that. I will also give you Module 1 of my PHP 101 course for free if you'll leave me an honest review. All the details on how to do that, how to get that free module, all that you can find at johnmorrisshow.com. Just click on the Start Here link at the top. If you're watching on YouTube, there should be a little button that pops up here. You can click on that. But again, johnmorrisshow.com. Just click on the Start Here link at the top. All right, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time.